when you're in a foxhole, you want someone who is not going to tell you that there's no bullets being fired. You want just to say where the bullets are coming from.
Right. Yeah. That's
right?
exactly right. Yeah.
You don't want someone in the foxhole with you being like, well, want to get a hot dog,
right.
like maybe a burger, or a smoothie. You want to say, no. There's a machine gun nest over there. There's mortar shells coming from there.
Right.
Here's what we're going to do to be able to do that.
Here's the plan of action to get out of this.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the type of friend that you want. And you definitely don't want one that's going to run for the hills behind you.
Yeah.
And
We've had those. We've had those.
Yes.
We definitely know who our allies are.
Candace Owens claims Charlie Kirk warned of his impending death to a donor and TPUSA staff the night before he died. She alleges Kirk explicitly told his security Dan Flood, "They are going to kill me tomorrow." And Owens questions the silence from those who allegedly knew, suggesting money or loyalty may be at play. Candace leaks text messages between herself and her best friend Charlie Kirk directly before he was assassinated, predicting he would die. Not here to tell you what you're allowed to wonder about. Charlie Kirk gets assassinated in public in front of a crowd, and the first reflex from the approved narrative crowd is always the same. Stop asking questions, stop noticing inconsistencies, stop looking at the gaps. No, if you want people to stop speculating, you don't shame them, you show your work. Here's what we know from a public court filing in Utah County. Prosecutors say Tyler James Robinson is charged with aggravated murder and other counts tied to Charlie Kirk's killing at a Turning Point USA event at Utah Valley University on September 10, 2025. The filing describes the setup. Kirk seated under a canopy, the crowd packed in close, temporary fencing just feet away, and a big glass walkway behind him overlooking the plaza. Utah County Attorney +1, it also describes the surveillance story. A UVU officer hears the shot and starts scanning for a sniper spot, then identifies a roof roughly 160 yards away. That roof is adjacent to an open, publicly accessible walkway. The officer climbs over a railing, drops onto the roof, and finds a clear shooting corridor plus impressions in the gravel consistent with someone lying prone. Utah County Attorney, then the cameras. The filing says a camera recorded an individual in dark clothing crossing the railing from that public walkway and dropping onto the roof around 12:15 p.m., later low crawling into position, and then running off after a short time that matches the known time of the shot. Utah County Attorney. So yeah, people are going to ask the obvious stuff. How is a roof next to a public walkway not locked down or watched during a high-profile event? Was anyone monitoring that roof camera live, or was it just a recording somebody watched after a man was already dead? If there was a camera covering the roof, who had the feed? Who was responsible for watching it? Who decided we're fine? This is the part where the 15 or 20 things that happened that day line starts to make sense. Not because everything is a plot, but because big institutions love doing the bare minimum, then acting shocked when the minimum fails. And it's not just ironic that Charlie Kirk asked the same kind of questions about JFK. He basically said, if the official story doesn't pass the smell test, your job as a citizen is not to clap, your job is to press. So when people say this doesn't add up, I'm not offended.
Hey Charlie, so I agree with a lot of your takes regarding black crime, women and like the LGBTQT community.
It's all right. You're good.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to get like some insight and perspective on what you think of the JFK assassination and why Israel is like kind of tied to it a lot.
Yeah, so there's really no evidence Israel's tied to it. I mean, the fact Mossad is mentioned in the JFK files doesn't mean Israel's tied to it. I actually don't believe it was Lee Harvey Oswald that acted alone. I think it's much more likely that it was Cuban intelligence and our own government that killed JFK for multiple reasons. And I believe there was a second shooter. Can go through all the reasons as to why, but I think it defies logic that Lee Harvey Oswald, who was a notoriously bad shot, somehow found himself all the way up in the, the fourth floor or the fifth floor of the Texas School Book Depository, right as that motorcade was flying in a single bolt action rifle, being able to administer, I think it was 3 shots in 5 seconds with lethal precision, even though we all saw with our lying eyes in the Zapruder film, John F. Kennedy's head go back and to the left. If there are 2 shooters, that means that the Warren Commission, which was the official report on the JFK assassination, was fraudulent and was faulty. And we know from dozens of eyewitnesses and many first-person accounts that the thing called the Grassy Knoll, which is right there, which you all can visit in downtown Dallas, that there was activity there. They wouldn't allow people up there. People heard gunshots from there. If it wasn't for the Zapruder film, all this would just be hearsay. So I believe there were 2 shooters, but I think it's a much more likely explanation that our own government was either involved or aware, and Cuban intelligence also very much wanted JFK dead.
I'm listening, because if the story is clean, transparency helps. If transparency hurts, that's when you should get skeptical. And if your first reaction is to yell, "Stop asking," ask yourself why you want silence more than clarity. Grief is human. Obedience is trained. In a free country, the default setting after a political killing should be facts, not hush tones. Power hates questions because they turn slogans into evidence, and evidence is what bureaucracies hate handing you. Now here's the recent revelation that should make every free speech person sit up. A judge entered a gag order in the Robinson case. Fox 13 reported that 4th District Court Judge Tony Graff entered an order that forbids anyone associated with the case from speaking to the news media, and prosecutors warned it could affect 2,000 or 3,000 potential witnesses. Since the shooting happened in front of a huge crowd, the judge said the order was aimed at avoiding problems from pretrial publicity. Fox 13 News Utah, KSTU. So I'm going to ask the question out loud because someone has to. Why the gag order? If the state story is strong, why clamp down on speech from the people who were there? If the concern is juror taint, okay, then be specific. Narrow it. Target the lawyers. Target official spokespeople. But when you start talking about an order that could touch thousands of witnesses, you're not just managing publicity, you're creating a silence zone. And silence zones breed 2 things, distrust and rumor. It's like putting duct tape over a smoke alarm. The fire still burns, you just can't hear the warning. Also, think about the incentive structure. A gag order makes it easier for institutions to avoid scrutiny in the early days when details are messy and accountability is hottest. Then time passes, people move on. The story hardens into what everybody remembers, even if it's incomplete. I'm not saying the gag order proves a cover-up. I'm saying it raises a fair question about priorities. Are we protecting a defendant's right to a fair trial, or are we protecting the system's comfort from public pressure? Because those are not the same thing. Here's what bugs me. America has tools for this. Change of venue, voir dire, jury instructions, sequestration in extreme cases. You can even limit what attorneys say in public because they're officers of the court and they have ethical rules already. But when the message that lands with the public is people who were there should not talk, you are basically pouring gasoline on suspicion. And let's be real, courts do this all the time in high-profile cases because nobody wants a mistrial. I get it, but I get it is not the same as I trust it. Trust has to be earned, especially after political assassination. If the public is locked out of first-hand accounts, then the only voices left are official press releases and professional commentators. That's how you end up with a neat, polished story that nobody is allowed to stress test. So the question stands, why this scope and why now? Why not publish a clear public timeline of what is already uncontested while the legal fight happens over what should stay sealed? Because if the only thing you clamp down on is speech and the only thing you don't release is clarity, people will assume you're hiding the ball. In a free society, the presumption should be openness, not muzzles. Now let's talk about the 15 or 20 things people keep pointing at, because that phrase isn't magic, it's a checklist. If a shooter can cross a railing from a public walkway, drop onto a roof, crawl into position, fire, and then run off, the question isn't, how dare you ask? The question is, where was the security layer that was supposed to stop that before the shot? The court filing says investigators used campus surveillance to track a suspect moving onto the roof and later running away with an item shaped like a rifle. Then answer this, was anybody watching that in real time? Because we reviewed the footage later is not a flex, that's an autopsy. And the filing also describes alleged witness tampering, including a message attributed to Robinson telling his roommate, "Don't talk to the media, and if any police ask you questions, ask for a lawyer and stay silent." Utah County Attorney. So even inside the case, the idea of silence is already a theme. Silence from a suspect, silence from a key witness, and now a court-ordered silence that can sweep up a whole crowd. Again, I'm not saying that proves anything hidden. I'm saying it should make you demand clarity, not less. Here are the kinds of questions adults are allowed to ask. Who owned rooftop security that day? UVU police, contracted security, TPUSA, local agencies, all of the above. What rooftops were assessed? And at what times? What cameras existed? Who monitored them? And what was the escalation protocol if someone entered a restricted area? Was that roof actually considered restricted, or was it treated like a harmless part of campus? If it was a known risk, why was a public walkway one hop away from a firing position? That's not conspiracy, that's basic accountability. Because if we can't even ask those questions after a political assassination, then we don't have public safety, we have public relations. And there's a pattern you can't unsee. Regular people in crowds often notice danger first, while professionals keep scanning the wrong direction. Why does that keep happening? Is it because security is a checkbox, not a mindset? Is it because everybody assumes someone else is watching the roof? That's what security theater looks like. Lots of uniforms, lots of radios, and then the threat slips through the one gap nobody owns. And here's the libertarian part. After the failure, the state always comes back with the same pitch. More funding, more cameras, more surveillance. Meanwhile, the basics get treated like optional upgrades. So no, I'm not going to move on because somebody told me to. Release the non-sensitive parts of the security plan. Release a timeline with timestamps. Release the after-action review when it exists. Tell us what failed, what changed, and who is accountable. If the system can't explain itself after a political killing, it doesn't deserve trust. It deserves oversight.
Generate by AI.
Now let's deal with the question people whisper because they're scared of getting dogpiled. Is there a link to Israel? You're allowed to ask. Just asking questions is not a crime. But here's the line you don't cross. You don't turn a question into a smear without evidence. You don't take a tragedy, toss a whole country or an entire ethnic group into the blame blender, and call that research. If somebody thinks Israel or any intelligence service or any political faction was involved, the standard is the same for everyone. Show proof, documents, witness statements, money trails, communications, something real, not vibes, not it's always them, not guilt by association, because it's always them is how people get played. It's how real accountability gets dodged, and it's how innocent people catch heat for the sins of actors they've never met. And this is where the JFK parallel matters. Charlie Kirk talked about JFK like a guy who knew institutions lie. He didn't say believe every rumor. He said don't accept a tidy story just because it's official. That's a big difference. So if the system is telling you to stop asking questions about Charlie Kirk's assassination, while a gag order is in place that can muzzle people tied to the case, you have every right to ask why the priority is silence over clarity. Fox 13 News Utah, KSTU, you want to honor the dead? Demand facts, demand a timeline, demand accountability for security decisions, demand transparency within reason, without wrecking due process. And also demand intellectual honesty from your own side. If you're going to accuse, be ready to prove. If you can't prove it, say, I don't know, and keep digging. Because the alternative is what the regime loves, a public fighting over theories, while the institutions that failed walk away untouched. Ask the questions. All of them. But keep your standards high, and don't let anyone bully you into silence. Here's what I want people to remember. The right to question power is not a permission slip from CNN or Fox or your favorite influencer. It's built into the American experiment. The state works for you, not the other way around. And when a state fails at something basic like controlling access points and sight lines around a public event, it tries to change the subject. It wants you arguing about personalities or party teams or tone instead of asking who made what decision. Electing a new politician to fix government is like swapping deck chairs on the Titanic and calling it a rescue mission. The machine keeps rolling unless you force it to explain itself, so keep it clean. Don't dox people, don't harass witnesses, don't chase strangers with cameras. Demand documents, procedures, and answers from institutions that can actually provide them. If we can do that, we might get something rare in modern America. Accountability that doesn't depend on which tribe you're in.
So do you not think it was a coincidence that Zapruder was Jewish and Jacob Rubenstein was Jewish as well?
Well, so, okay, I actually didn't even know Zapruder was Jewish, but why was that matter? And then if the video came out, how does that help or weaken the cause?
It's not like a flat out statement. It's just like something to think about. Like, Israel's always tied to these type of events, so
yeah, I would push it back a little bit on that. It's fine. It's a fair question. By the way, the way you get more anti-Semitism is by booing people that have questions like that. So we need to just talk about it. Again, in the JFK files, Mossad is mentioned. One of the reasons why Mossad is mentioned so much is that they're just a very good intelligence operation. That was not mentioned as if they were tied or that they knew about it or that they were involved. Again, I think the best reading of what happened there is who wanted JFK dead the most. Again, a lot of people said Israel wanted JFK dead. I'd love to hear that argument. But definitely Lyndon Baines Johnson and parts of our own government and the Cubans wanted him dead. And who actually made it happen? There were like 15 or 20 things that happened that day that were inexcusable. They changed the parade route. He rode in an open air convertible. LBJ decided not to ride alongside of him. The vehicle slowed down right when it went by the Texas School Book Depository. A lot there, right? And then, again, I think that all of us are smarter to believe that it was simply Lee Harvey Oswald. The more important question is not, oh, who did it? We have to first acknowledge it that more than one person did it. Yeah. Once we acknowledge that more than one person did it, then we can expose our government to have lied to us about the JFK assassination, which then I think will sober a lot of us about trusting the government in the future.
And one more question. When do you think the Epstein files will be released?
Man, you're speaking my language. I think the Epstein files need to be released yesterday. Okay. We need to know every single person and get the Epstein client list out immediately. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Audio's a little weird. Yeah, all right. And the Diddy files. That's right. Erica right there. Strong patriot.
What is it about JFK's assassination that triggers Zionists? Why do they pretend that it's an act of anti-Semitism to explore the environment and the things that JFK was adamantly opposed to? I'm going to describe that to you, and I'm going to use only Jewish sources here, so we can remove ourselves from any claims of anti-Semitism. These are just the facts of what JFK was fighting while he was in office, okay? One of the things that he was opposed to was the American Zionist Council. He wanted them, which would go on to become AIPAC. We're still having a discussion about AIPAC's undue influence in our elections today. They were back then known as the American Zionist Council. And JFK's Department of Justice told them that they had to register as a foreign agent under FARA, okay? And so it would color your imagination, obviously, if I'm saying all these things and you find out that I'm registered under FARA for a foreign country like Ukraine, you would go, okay, well, that makes sense. Candace is telling me that we should go to war with Ukraine, but I now know that Candace is actually accepting tens of millions of dollars from Ukraine. That's the purpose of FARA registration. If all you have to do once you become registered under FARA is to reveal your expenditures, reveal how you are being funded, allow people to understand where you are getting this money from, why would they be this opposed to it? I don't know the answer to this. I'm never going to know the answer to this, because what we do know is that a couple of weeks later, JFK got shot, okay? And what was running parallel to this, of course, was that he was on the phone arguing, screaming, having fights with Prime Minister Ben-Gurion of Israel, because he also did not want Israel as a state to become nuclearly armed, okay? And they're fighting on the phone. They still won't declassify these arguments that he was having, but they absolutely were at each other's throats and they hated each other. And he was very opposed to the Dimona reactor. This is something that you can even find in speeches like the Gaddafi speech.
خارج عن الملفات لازم نعرفها. أنا اللي نعرفها والعالم ممكن يعرفها واللي درسناها في التاريخ إن كندي قرر تفتيش مفاعل ديمونة الإسرائيلي. هل في قنابل ذرية وإلا لا؟ وعلشان كده تم تخلص منهم.
When you add those two things together, you go, okay, well, would it be a conspiracy to suggest that Ben-Gurion and the state of Israel hated him and he was opposed to them and he was opposed to them getting funding and he was opposed to them having undue influence in American politics, and then he dies? And then you weigh that against the fact that the problem for them instantly disappeared as soon as JFK died. Because what happened was that when Lyndon B. Johnson got into office, he was the vice president, all of their problems were instantly resolved because he reversed course on everything.